Welcome to the Catholic Dadcast by Rich Pintang, where we break down all things dad from a Catholic perspective. Now more than ever, we need dads to step up their game. Gentlemen, buckle up and get ready for battle. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of the Catholic Dadcast. I'm Rich Pintang, your host and founder, and we're broadcasting from sunny Orange County, California. And today's episode is on the subject of masturbation and overcoming the sins of the flesh. And brothers and sisters, because I know this is a sensitive subject to many, this is even more reason why having an open conversation about this is probably needed. And I can say that, you know, this being what it is, I'm so pleased and honored to have my guest to be courageous enough to share how he was able to and continues to fight the temptation of masturbation and overall these types of sins of the flesh that can take over the lives of many. And so today's guest is a convert to the faith. He's a faithful Catholic with a strong devotion to the saints. And my guest today is going by the name Augustine. So, Augustine, welcome to the Catholic Dadcast.
Hello, good morning.
Glad to have you, brother. I like I said, you know, um, I tend to want to keep it value packed. I keep it light. I keep it authentic and genuine. And first and foremost, man, I just applaud you that you recognize how much of a blessing um, your faith has been in your journey and continues to be. And I would hope that there are going to be some listeners and viewers that are going to see this as an opportunity to look at themselves in the mirror and say, "Hey, I never knew that," or um, I'm gonna make a decision to find ways to avoid that kind of temptation. But brother, welcome to the show, man. I'm glad to have you.
Thanks.
Um, your your walk. I mean, obviously, what I've mentioned is you've converted to the faith, and is there anything specific on your side that led you to want to pursue the truth of the Catholic faith?
Well, the events that led to my conversion, it was ultimately an existential crisis where I realized a lot of the goals I had set for myself in life really didn't much. And going church shopping, if you want to call it that, many of the churches, once you start asking the really difficult questions, for instance, what we're going to talk about today, ask about sins of the flesh, many of them reflect the question back onto you. Um, what do you think about that? And every time it bugged me because I don't know. I'm asking you. Why are you asking me? But the Catholic Church was the only one that had a definite answer on really difficult questions. Example, sins of the flesh. And even though at the time I was struggling, it was really great to hear a definite answer and facts and history backing that up. And the same could not be said about many other churches. So ultimately, I decided to join the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and praise God. I mean, I think that when you look at that, you know how much accountability the Catholic Church can provide, some direction and through the sacraments and through the prayer of the faithful, you find that we can overcome a lot of these things. And I think that sometimes even Christianity tends to be looked at as, oh, they think that everything's perfect, and it's nothing like that. But when we developed a relationship and the joy that our relationship with Jesus Christ gives us, and all the freedom and the joy and the peace and the comfort that is offered through the Catholic faith historically, it's it's something that you want to share, and that it's the go-to compared to temporary pleasures or what we think makes us happy, to something that we take with us, and ultimately, hopefully, punch a ticket into to heaven at some point. Now, when it comes to to masturbation, I would say that first and foremost, there are many people that might not even look at it as a sin. And I think that it would be appropriate for me to share what is in the catechism, and it's under 2352. And when we read this, it really should make sense, and we'll kind of break it down, and we're going to talk about how your journey was. And it in 2352 in the catechism, it says, by masturbation is to be understood the deliberate stimulation of the genital organs in order to derive sexual pleasure. Both the magisterium of the church, in the course of constant tradition, and the moral sense of faithful have been in no doubt and have firmly maintained that masturbation is an intrinsically and gravely disordered action. And it goes on to say, for here, sexual pleasure is sought outside of the sexual relationship which is demanded by the moral law, and in which the total meaning of mutual self giving and human procreation in the context of true love is achieved. So, brothers and sisters, I'm sharing that with you because most people may not see that um, as a sin, but because it's outside of procreation, it becomes more of a selfless act. And although a lot of times in society that you're told it's natural and um, it's healthy, and these are all lies. And when you think about it, it's because when Adam and Eve were put on this earth, they were made specifically and perfectly for each other to procreate. Augustine, anything on your side that comes to mind when you hear the reading?
Yeah, so as an adult convert, once you join the conversion classes, at some point they hand you a catechism. And I remember reading that passage, and that was one of those passages that I read, and my eyebrows shot up. Whoa, okay. And remember what I was saying about the Catholic Church has those centuries of history and facts and evidence. It's all right there, like you said. If you want to go from design, these parts, they're in fact the only parts on your body that are designed. How do I say this? They can't be used alone. They have to be used with another set of parts
Yeah, great point.
from another body, another person.
Mm.
Um, and the sexual organs are unique in that regard. Only part in the human anatomy that's like that.
Mm.
And the other thing I have to fall back to Archbishop Fulton Sheen when he says that freedom or sin is not freedom. Sin is slavery. Um, that is, yeah, you may feel free to do these things, but what's the consequence? Okay, you're addicted to this pleasure, and you could look up on the internet just what kinds of things this does. And yeah, I remember before converting coming across studies saying, "Oh, this is something that's good for your health." I can't remember what quote it was. I can't remember who said it, but someone, probably someone in Hollywood, said, "Oh, masturbation is television for smart people." What? Okay, so if you want to look at what this does to your brain, oxytocin, what's the other one? I can't remember the chemical names.
Mm-hmm. It has something to do, I'm
Floods.
sure, with the pleasure part of the brain. Yeah.
Yeah, floods your serotonin. I think that's the one.
Mm.
One of the feel good chemicals. So it floods your brain with these neurostimulators. It's only temporary. So I like to delineate between happiness and joy. Happiness is a temporary thing, whereas joy is eternal. And reading that passage in the Catechism, I it felt like a kick in the nuts.
Mm.
Right, pun
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah.
um, but if you meditate on that passage, think, what is temporary happiness and what is eternal joy? Would you do something that causes temporary happiness? And if you've fallen into this, admit it. Yeah, it feels good. Only for about 9 minutes. Afterward, what happens?
It's fleeting.
Yeah. And another interesting thing that I noticed, so for me, I started making progress a little bit when someone taught me how to pray the rosary.
Wow. That's
And
profound.
I realized that the days I prayed the rosary, it was a lot easier for me to resist the temptation.
Mm.
Um, and at some point, I figured out while you're in the act, it's impossible to pray. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're struggling with this stuff, I encourage you to try it, because you will find that the two are diametrically opposed to each other. And it was one of those really weird things. I never really thought about it.
Wow.
It's impossible to pray while you're doing it. That's probably by extension, it's impossible to speak while you're doing it.
And to your point, Augustine, I think that was one of the reasons why I felt inclined to share in one of the Wednesday wisdoms what can be done that's truly practical, effective, and without having to overcomplicate it for guys that want to make excuses. And really, it's not just guys, but women as well. But to make an excuse for themselves, because I would say that a lot of people want to ignore that. They don't want to acknowledge that it is a sinful act, and it takes away from the beauty of procreation. But you're right. Um, Holding the rosary, um, having worship music, having sacramentals around you.
Oh yeah.
Would you agree that those are things that are reminding that stay on the straight and narrow, focus on me, and not anything temporary or the sinful life that you want to leave behind?
Oh yeah. So sacramentals, actually have an interesting story about that one. I feel like I was forgetting to mention something.
It'll come back to you.
I'll remember it in a bit. So sacramentals. Have you heard about the cord of Saint Philomena?
I have not share with us because I'm sure it has something to do with your uh, your journey.
Okay, so the cord of Saint Philomena. Saint Philomena was a virgin and martyr. Her remains were discovered in the catacombs in the 1800s, but she lived during the ancient Roman days, and she became a saint because of her miracles. One of the few saints who became a saint because of her miracles. And there's a story about her as a Greek princess, and she was supposed to marry Emperor Diocletian, but she had consecrated her virginity to Jesus beforehand, so she refused. And you could look up this story. The story is really, really harrowing. Um, but long story short, he threw her into the dungeons. He tried to drown her. He tried to flay her. She healed miraculously. He tried to shoot her with arrows. And all of these horrible ways to die, she was miraculously saved, miraculously healed, um, until finally the emperor gave up and beheaded her. And she was 13 when she was martyred. And so she's a patron saint, among other things, of chastity. And one of the sacramentals related to Saint Philomena is the blessed cord. And what this is it's a cord, either cotton or wool, half white for purity, half red for blood of martyrs. And there are two knots on one end and one knot on the other end. And you tie this cord around your waist. Think about that. I'm an engineer. How practical. You tie this cord around your waist. When I first heard about that, I was just blown away. But I was still in a convert first time. I was still converting first time I heard about this. And going around to some of the Catholic stores, it's hard to find. I didn't find a cord until much later. I am wearing the cord right now, and I'm very thankful I was able to find one. There's a nice woman. If you're in the Orange County area, there's a nice woman who distributes blessed sacramentals. I could share the contact information after the show,
Great.
so you could put it in your show notes.
And you can see that something as simple as a sacramental, in this case, look at how much power that has given you as a reminder, um, proper put in the proper area, the cord itself, what it represents, how much it means to you, because a lot of people don't necessarily look at this as a form of slavery, of bondage,
Yeah,
but for some, they may, and I would hope that this would also overcoming and wanting to overcome something like this will allow you to see how much more, you know, our good Lord has in store for us when we're obedient to that, and we can decline our fleshly desires, because um, there's going to be just some that just say that, oh, it's just part of what we do. And I think the other part is, I can imagine, people saying, no one knows about it anyways, and it's just something I do." But are you we know that's not true. We know that God is all knowing, and so that's just living, to me, it's living a lie. but but let's take a step into where you came from, because we're talking where you are today. But there had to be at some point when you realized, there's something more to life, and this isn't going to lead me there. When did you really realize that it was becoming problematic?
All right. So the moment I realized this is a big problem, I remember that. A few years ago, there was this craze about fidget spinners. Do you remember those?
Hmm.
Little
Sure.
metal, usually weighted things. The good ones were weighted.
Mm.
Spin it around, watch it spin. And I was in my office at work, sitting in some conference call, and I had fidget spinner in my hand. Um, the center spins freely. I was just playing with it, spinning the centerpiece of the fidget spinner. Then I thought, okay, hang on, why did it feel like my heart just skipped a beat in anticipation of something just now? And then I realized, oh, these are some of the same motions that I use. And I promise that's as much detail as the mechanics that I'm going to get into. I don't like to think about the mechanics. I understand
Sure.
others don't like to. I'm with you on that. The less you can think about, once
Hmm.
you get over this, the less you can think about that kind of stuff. It's kind of easier. Um, that was for me. That was the moment I realized, okay, this has never been a problem in my life, but clearly there's something wrong here, and I'm going to have to deal with this by the time I convert, because I certainly don't want to hit the confessional every single week confessing the same sin over and over again.
Yeah, you
So
bet.
we
Yeah.
talked about sacramentals. Um, what really did it for me, it was the moment of my baptism and confirmation and first communion. So I'm a convert, which means on Easter I received all of the sacraments of initiation at once. I was baptized, then confirmed, then we all lined up and received communion for the
Mm.
first time.
Mm.
Um, and this is tying back to any contact with the divine can help. So the first time I received first communion, I received it kneeling directly on tongue, the way communion should be administered, the only way communion should be administered, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm.
And I just knelt there, just completely flabbergasted, for lack of a better term, because I had this realization that God, he he kind of blipped himself into the history of man, became man, um, preached and died on the cross for all of our sins, just so that we might have a chance at sanctifying or being sanctified and getting to heaven. And I just knelt there with the body of Christ in my mouth. I was nervous because this is the body of Christ. What do I do?
Right.
Just amazed that contact with the divine could be so simple. And it was a really beautiful feeling. And I thought, I knelt there just amazed. Okay, Augustine, this is a new and powerful master to serve. Obviously, this master is more powerful than any other master you've served. He's more powerful than the master of sins of the flesh.
Man,
If
those
you
are
choose to, Augustine, you can serve him. And at that moment, I knew it's impossible to serve two masters. It's impossible to serve both God and mammon, right?
powerful.
So I chose to serve God. I have never masturbated since that day.
You know what's amazing about that is there are cradle Catholics and those that don't want to acknowledge that they don't feel like it's worth what they think is a sacrifice. Mostly our flesh is telling us that we can have our cake and eat it too, but the reality is that's not true. And I think about those defining moments that you had the spiritual maturity. You probably, without having that as your past, you probably wouldn't be as faithful as you are. You may not have even made your way to the Catholic faith. And by being brave enough to share something that's as sensitive as it may be, there's a lot of honor from you speaking openly about the challenge it was, how it can be a temptation, but knowing how your relationship with God and your Catholic faith moves you away from even thinking of that because it's in the past. And there's a lot of honor in that, and it is honorable because you know ultimately you're better suited to serve the Lord with your life, which even leads me, Augustine, to a specific reading about our bodies. And it's in Romans 12:1, and it says, I urge you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, your spiritual worship. So I'm thinking about your first communion. I'm thinking about you recognizing this is Jesus coming into my body. And if I'm not in my best form, or I'm living a lie, then I'm not deserving. But we know Jesus is deserving of all, and we're forever going to be indebted. So I tell you, man, I honor that. I honor you surrendering it and continually daily trusting in Him. That's a big deal. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope I don't sound hardliner in this, but just look at the catechism. Catechism says that this is gravely disordered. And look into the reasons why. And for me, it was just the realization that you cannot serve two masters. So which is it going to be? Um, God, the ultimate master, or sins of the flesh? You can't have both. Like I said, try praying while masturbating. I'm telling
Yeah.
you, it's pretty much impossible.
No. And it's a great point. And I think when I'm thinking of the listeners and the viewers, that for them it's really is a it's up to them to have the desire to put that behind them. And what I'll share with you, Augustine, is when I first had, I wouldn't say I would have had a very defining moment when I took the same steps as you did. I don't think I ever looked at the habit um, as problematic, but I knew it was not healthy for me to want something that is temporary pleasure when it's against the teachings of our good Lord. For me, it was actually this time frame. It must have been 2018 when I said, "Okay, Lent, not going to do it,"
Yeah.
and I never looked back. I mean, so once you've determined, I mean, for some, for example, someone might suffer a stroke before they stop smoking, for example.
Yeah.
It really shouldn't take that. But a lot of times we're going to ignore a lot of those little signs. And that's where you're not really being true to yourself. And so that I think our message to the dads and any other listeners is that, you know, living a chaste life is maybe it's not easy, but it's honorable and it's doable. And in the times that we might fall short, we have the gift of confession, and we have things we can do daily to walk honorably and righteously. You know, I'm sure that's why you feel the need to um to work, if it's daily mass or it's adoration. These are all things that I think you would probably do
Oh
because
yeah.
you see the peace that comes from it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Um, the resources to get help are out there. Ask Saint Philomena for help. She helps a lot. Um, any contact you can have with the divine, get the sacraments. Obviously, go to confession first. But my advice to other young men struggling with this, and the reason I did this interview was because I every now and then I run into other people and are going through the same struggle. And the problem with the thing with sexual sin is it's just so personal and intimate that we're afraid to talk about it. And that fear comes from it being just so personal and intimate. It's embarrassing. Yeah. I mean, here I am behind an alias just because I don't necessarily want this stuff tied to my name. Not quite yet. But my advice for me, I was kind of fortunate because I never got into pornography.
Mm.
So this was purely masturbation. But the flip side of that, if you think about it, in that case, your imagination becomes the pornography.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So any other any other women that you run into, any pictures you see,
That's right.
that all of that feeds into the imagination. And yeah, that thought scares me to this day. Am I still messed up to this day? I don't know. Um, I hope I'm. I hope I'm not. I still view a person as a person. Um, but yeah, that thought is still in the back of my head every day. And how much did this mess me up? Maybe I'll never know. Um, and every day I'm very thankful um that I have recovered to the degree I have. Anyway, my advice, um, I have to echo Alcoholics Anonymous. You got to get to 90 days. 90 days. If you can get to 90 days, then you can do 120 days. Then, then you can get to a whole year. But you got to get to that 90 days because something happens in those. in those 90 days, your routines, your habits, they change. And 90
Yes,
days seems to
that's
be
right.
the magical number for that.
Imagine that. For me, it was 40 days, but I also had that looming accountability that, oh, so you're saying that you just did that so you can say that you did that, or did you really sacrifice that because you wanted to have a closer relationship with me? That was almost the question I think that I was faced with. But to your point, those are all milestones, and anyone has ever had some sort of addiction or habit that they needed to kick, they ultimately had to choose whether or not they wanted to. And part of it was is to associate the habit with the opposite feeling of what you used to think it was. So let's just say it was pleasure, it was excitement. The opposite of that would be disappointment. The opposite of that would be disgrace. And that's the way
Yeah.
I would look at, for example, in my case, my wife. I would say, I'm not I'm not honoring you the way I would, because like you said, Augustine, your mind is going to go elsewhere. And then for most people, they're going to say, how do I enhance this? And thus comes a whole new bondage through the how disgusting and overwhelming the pornography industry is on individuals. And I want to share this. I think it's appropriate that I share this because the passage that I was looking at um, before our recording was in 1 John chapter 2, and it's verse 16 through 17, and it reads, "For all that is in the world, sensual lust, enticement for the eyes, and a pretentious life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. Yet the world and its enticements are passing away, but whoever does the will of God remains forever." Tell me that you don't look at society and see how a lot of it is rooted in verses like that, especially when it comes to pornography and everything that's associated with occupying your mind.
Oh man, it is in light of a passage like that. It is so easy to say something that condemns the entire world these days.
No kidding.
So I won't go there.
That's a whole new episode.
The world is not entirely evil. I'll just say that. Um, so for me, I did get to the point where I realized, I think I mentioned this earlier, where yeah, this feels good. This feels very good. I'm not going to lie. This feels extraordinarily good, but it only lasts a few minutes. And then afterwards, you have a mess to clean up, both spiritual and actual, both spiritual and physical. Um, that was supposed to be a pun.
The joy that we get through our relationship is forever. And
Yeah, the joy of getting closer to God, building up a relationship with God, with the saints. Saint Philomena is kind of like either my girlfriend or daughter. I don't know how to describe it. There's a saying that behind every great man, there's a great woman. For me, that woman is Saint Philomena. Um, I can't remember where I was going with this. I just felt like I had to say
so,
that.
sometimes that's really what the saints do for you, though, is
Yeah,
it brings out the virtue in you also.
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
said, I commend you because, like we were saying, some folks just don't want to acknowledge that. And I wouldn't doubt that our episode today ends up being something that's downloaded a lot more in private so that people can look at it and say that they do want better, and our good Lord deserves better. And when you look at the cross and the sacrifice, something that we know should be put away and behind us should be. And it's only through the grace of God and putting that away in front of the cross and acknowledging that that's sin that you no longer want. You're ultimately saying, Jesus, I do trust in you. And that's what we're getting from that. But I as we close up the show, we'll add all the add everything to the notes. And I to our listeners, I hope that if this has been valuable to you, that you share it with others, that you leave us a review and just let us know that we're adding content that we think is valuable to all of you guys. And that's the best way we can get our word out to the Catholic dads, the men, protecting our families, healing society, drawing them closer to the Lord, and ultimately saving their souls and leading them into heaven. So um, outside of that, Augustine, I appreciate you. I salute you. I honor you, and I am very honored to have you on the show to share something that I know is very sensitive. But I know that there are going to be men out there that look at this and start to look at themselves in a more honest light in the mirror and say that there's a lot of honor in what we just discussed. So we can also talk offline, but
Yeah, a couple of closing thoughts on my
yeah,
end.
please.
What we're talking about, you mentioned the seven deadly sins and the opposing virtues. What we're talking about is the virtue of chastity. And I've run into people who think chastity is equivalent to complete abstinence from sex. And that's not necessarily the case. Chastity does imply complete abstinence if you're not married. Um, we're Catholics. We're not prudes. If you're married, then chastity takes on sex in the proper context of procreation and unity. So what the real conundrum is that the things we're talking about, these are things that are beautiful. They're designed to be wonderful and beautiful,
Mm.
but they also have a proper context to be used in. I mean, we're men. Women are beautiful. A relationship with a woman is beautiful. Marriage is beautiful. The marriage act is also beautiful. These are all things that are designed to be some kind of reflection of God. And the last thing, looping back to the 90 days thing, demons hate to be laughed at. So once you get to the 90 days, celebrate. And here's what I suggest. I mentioned this to a priest, a very holy priest, and he laughed at this. I said, I'm going to have a hot dog party. We're going to cook all the hot dogs we can. Get the cheese filled ones, cook them, and we're going to eat them.
Oh man, some
And that
uh,
that was what I did
some
when I got to
clergy
90 days.
some clergy have some great senses of humor,
Demons hate to be laughed at,
and
and
and I do
that's how you
appreciate
mock them.
I do appreciate that the fact that you can share in a very light manner there. Uh, now, probably not gonna have a hot dog for a long time. On that note, brothers and sisters, this podcast episode is ended. Go now in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.